Clayton. I'm the director of the Foley Institute here at WSU, and on behalf of the Institute, I want to welcome you out to our event today. It's a beautiful day outside, but it's going to be even better presentation inside today. We are fortunate to have with us today Chris Parker, who is a professor of political science at the University of Washington. He received his PhD from the University of Chicago, and his research interests focus on American politics, civil rights and social movements, and public opinion. Chris's work has appeared in many of the top journals in political science and in race studies. His first book, Fighting for Democracy, Black Veterans and the Struggle Against White Supremacy in the Post-War South, published by Princeton Press, won the American Political Science Association's Ralph Bunche Award for the best work on ethnic and cultural pluralism. His second book, Change They Can Believe In, the Tea Party...
Can't believe it.
You can't believe it. Change you can't believe it. The Tea Party and Reactionary Politics in America, also published by Princeton University Press, won the American Political Science Association's award for the best book on race, ethnicity, and politics. It explored the attitudes and behavior of the Tea Party movement. And Chris is currently working on a book examining the forebearers of the Tea Party and how their resistance to progress resulted in today's climate of racial conflict. Chris is going to speak for, I think, about 40 minutes or so, and then we'll have some Q&A after that. Join me now in welcoming Chris Parker.
Hey, well, if I didn't know the turnout would be this good, I would have dressed up a little more. I thought I was just going to have a few people and just shoot the shit with Cornell and Richard. Anyway, so look, I promise you guys this is not going to be like a presentation you guys have ever seen before, seriously, because I don't take this stuff that fucking seriously, right? I just said that, right? So it's like, you get a bunch of academics, they act as though we're rocket scientists or we're curing cancer or we're doing heart transplant surgery in the Congo, and it's really not that serious, right? But I have been right about everything since 2010. It's all there online. You guys can look, right? It's all there. I wouldn't sit up here and just say this stuff, right? All right, so what I want you guys to, honestly, I'm a little, normally when I give these talks, I'm full of confidence because I've already given it like many times and run all the numbers. But this time, I haven't done a talk of this nature in quite some time because this is something that I'm getting ready to roll out. This is my first time giving this talk, so I'm just going to ask you guys I was going to say be gentle, but don't worry about that. I'm a University of Chicago PhD, and we like it rough. If it ain't rough, it ain't right. So we like it rough. So please, just don't try to spare my feelings, right? If you have, I see a bunch of white people here, so don't mind. I am not going to think you racist if you come hard in the paint for me. I don't care, right? I just want you guys to really point out what you guys see as serious flaws or even minor flaws. And there will definitely be some flaws here because I'm still in the very real process of thinking this through. So I want you guys to really come hard for me. If you think I'm full of shit, tell me I'm full of shit. Okay? My language is like whatever, right? You guys just have to just forget that, right? That's just kind of how I roll. Okay. So the impetus for this project, you guys, is because it actually started in Europe. When I was on a sabbatical over there, and I was trying to figure out the ways in which the theoretical framework that Matt and I developed for change they can't believe in, whether or not it carried over, whether or not we could see the same things in Europe. And so what happened was, this is 2000, I want to say 15. And so I given a couple talks, and I had some bare inklings that I had a faint idea that it probably could, that it was basically what was happening, or what happened with the Tea Party, was this reaction to this perception of rapid social change, right? And Matt and I made the argument in the Tea Party book that this was not just about economic anxiety. A lot of people suggested it was. I thought it was bullshit from word go, right? I just knew it was not right because there was just too much there. That was one clue to me. But the second clue is if you look at a lot of supporters of the Tea Party, and I mean strong supporters of the Tea Party, they did really well economically. This was not about economic anxiety. In other words, this was not about this material anxiety, something that's associated with material wants and needs. This was more symbolic about the meaning of the changing face, literally, of America that could be associated, or that was associated, with the nation's first black president. That was just too much for some white people. Too much, right? Think about who the president is. We know who the president is from the time we're little kids. The president has enormous symbolic influence in the United States. The head of government at home, the face of the nation abroad, right? It's huge symbolic significance. And for some white people, that was just too much, right? So I thought, and we thought the same thing, or I thought, right? Because Matt had moved on to other stuff, and I had moved on to this other research. And I want to say this real quick before I forget. I initially was going to present the book that Matt and I currently at work on. It's called The Great White Hope, Donald Trump, Race, and the Crisis of American Democracy. So I guarantee you, if you guys are Trump supporters out here, you're going to fucking hate me. Seriously, you're going to hate me, right? You seriously going to hate me, right? But this is about, but this is why we have tenure, right? We can speak our mind, right? We can agree to disagree. So anyway, so what happened was over in Europe, they kept talking about that populism was a thin-centered ideology. And if you know anything about American politics, especially if one is a public opinion specialist, there's no such thing as a thin ideology, right? It either is or it is not, right? It is by nature a very deeply entrenched belief system, right? And that got me suspicious, and I started doing more reading. I went back to Hofstadter, and then I even went back and read some C. Van Woodward, and I just really dove headlong into this populism literature because I just didn't think what they said sounded right. And so what we're going to see today is an exploration of some of these themes and a critique of populism, if you will. Now, I don't have all the answers, and I don't pretend to have all the answers, you guys. I'm hoping you guys will help put me on that path if you feel disposed to do so, in spite of my rough around the edges appearance, right? Believe me, I know how to speak the King's English, and I got fine clothes, and I drive a Benz and all that stuff, but whatever, right? I feel like I'm among friends here, so I can be myself. Okay, so the first thing I want to show you guys is a Google Trends search, and what I kind of wanted to do is try to see, okay, so Trump is populist, and then I'm going to show some figures that depict searches for, Trump as nationalist or Trump nationalism. But what I wanted to try to first define is trying to see, like, the extent to which the mass public associates Trump as a populist or Trump with populism. And this is just kind of like a rough cut of this. And Google Trends has become a really popular way of kind of trying to see where public opinion is going, right? It's still a kind of lagging indicator, but it's still a pretty decent indicator. But it's not thoroughly scientific by any means. Okay, so I want you guys to understand that. This is, once again, I'm just trying to get at the big picture first, and then trying to zoom down a little bit. So if you see, if you look at the figure here, that this is between March 2015 and December 2018, and of course Trump announced on June, and sometime, I forget the exact date, in June 2015. And we see, at the far end here, let me see if I can get this. So at the far end, we don't really see anything going. Is this?
Okay. Yeah, it doesn't show very well, though.
Okay, I'll just.
You can kind of see.
I'll just point. Okay. Okay, so this is when Trump announces his presidential bid. So not a whole lot of going on. And we see around the presidential primary, it starts to spike a little bit. The election, it spikes a lot, right? We get way up here, right? It's sort of, it crests right up here, right around the election. Then with the inaugural address, it starts to go down, and we see it kind of peters out a little bit, as his presidency, continues right after inauguration and things settle in. Now, what I'm going to show now is how we're zooming in on this now. So, we see again, this is really around from January 2016, right around the inauguration. 2016 primary election. Yeah, that's a miss. Yeah, that's not right. June. Okay. So basically what we're doing is we're zooming in here. Focus on November 6, 2016, and we kind of see again election and inaugural address. And what we're showing here, however, is in the blue we see Trump as populist, and then in the red we see Trump populism. Of course, these terms are associated, but for just for analytical clarity, I directed the student to pull them apart just so we can see some relief here. And we see blue Trump populist, best, I guess, if you will, Trump and populism, but I mean, I guess we could sort of average those, and which I'll probably have her do in the long run, but I just kind of wanted to zoom in a little bit so you guys can show that there's a slight difference between the two references to Trump. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to switch to Google nationalist, Trump. Search Trump as nationalist or nationalism, and we see one spike at the election, and we see a larger spike, well, slightly larger, around Charlottesville, and then we have these 3 hate crimes that happened within 72 hours, right? And it spikes up even further. And again, this is just what we're trying to gauge is kind of like the public interest or associating Trump with these terms, right? That's all we're really gauging here. And so now we want to zoom in. And so we see the Unite the Right rally, and right now we're up through September 2017. Let me back up one slide here. Yeah, so the other one goes further out. This one goes a lot further out here, right? We're right around, this goes a lot further out here, September. So I'm thinking this is sometime in 2018. I have to get her, October 2018. See right down here? So we're out here in October 2018, right? But if we just wanted to, I wanted to illustrate just this, how big it was relative to the inaugural address, right? Just what that looked like vis-a-vis Charlottesville. And we all know what happened in Charlottesville with the Unite the Right demonstration and the uprising that happened in its aftermath. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to look at the aggregate trends, right? We're going to look at populism, populist versus national and nationalism, right? And we see right here, like the nationalist trends really, there's a big difference between them and the populism trends, okay? And so the last one of these is, again, we're comparing Trump populist versus Trump nationalist, and the red is Trump nationalist, and it's swamping Trump as populist, right? I think we got one more, yeah. So then she looks at white nationalists, right? And we see yellow is Trump white nationalist, right? And that's just it really tracks well with the just the straight nationalist frame. But then when we get out here towards the hate crimes, you have just Trump straight up nationalist, and white nationalist kind of falls away. Now, I mean, I don't have any firm conclusions about the patterns that we just observed. I just got this last night, so I'm still trying to make sense of it myself. But I wanted to just show you guys, just to give you guys a visual of kind of how these things were tracking, how these terms were tracking vis-a-vis Trump. So now we get into the more or less lecture part, and I left a lot of time for Q&A and for some back and forth, because I really want to get what you guys think on this stuff. Okay, so populism. So I imagine there's going to be some discussion about this in the Q&A. But let's just start with this anti-elite, but it's small d democratic, right? It was about, and this is one of the things I want to get into in a little bit, it's about the expansion of small d democracy, not its contraction. And I want to contrast this with the way that populism is used more contemporarily, right? It's populism more contemporarily is really about the contraction of small d democracy, right? And they call it, like people like John Judas, for example, calls it right-wing populism. And I just happen to be of the opinion that if you have to qualify it, then it's not it, right? It's either populism or it is not, right? I'm open to have that discussion with you. So it's about the virtuous people versus the corrupt elite. It originated with the Farmers Alliance in the Midwest and Plain states in the mid-19th century. And it was generally about the farmers versus East Coast capital. The farmers felt like they were just really getting taken advantage of by capital on the East Coast. And so it was primarily, so if you listen to C. Vann Woodward, whom I don't know about you guys, but for whom I have a lot of respect for that man, the late C. Vann Woodward, is a really famous Southern historian. He thought it a class-based movement. And so with practical economic goals, right, the graduated income tax, regulation of railroads and telegraph, lower tariff, low interest loans to farmers, direct election of senators. I threw that last one in. That's not necessarily an economic or class-based thing. That just, I wanted to show you guys that it was really about the expansion of small d democracy. Perhaps most important, it was not a moral crusade. this movement was more about material interests, right? Not about some moral crusade that in which Hofstadter was suggesting in The Age of Reform and, of course, The Paranoid Style in American Politics, that this was really about this fierce defense of the rural way of life. And so if you really want to read an extended critique of this, read Michael Rogan's. It's a book published in 1967 called McCarthy and Intellectuals, MIT Press. And he really goes in on Hofstadter, right? And I find his critique really to be very, very persuasive. The poverty of contemporary populism. So here's a conceptual critique. Populism is not inherently tolerant, but the way it's used now suggests otherwise. And let me unpack that for a second. So populism, yes, there were some anti-Semitism, and yes, there was some anti-black. Populism was kind of anti-black. I will not try to sugarcoat that. It was, right? But they still had come together over these basic class issues, right? Because think about when we're talking the mid-19th century to the late 19th century, right? And so what was happening then? Well, you had the Emancipation Proclamation, you had the end of the Civil War, right? And you had a bunch of these former slaves who had to go back to the farm, right? Where else could they go? They didn't have any other means of making a living or life for themselves, right? And so a bunch of them went back to sharecropping, right? A bunch of them did sharecropping. Now, some of them actually got their own farms, but there were a lot of black folks that were involved in either one of two things. It was either domestic service or the agricultural economy, right? And so what happened was you had the Farmers Alliance first, and then it became the Populist Party eventually, that tried to organize along class lines, right? So you did have some populists, right? Some leading populists who defended black workers, right? It wasn't necessarily because of some mutual affection. It was more out of class interest, right? But I'm not gonna lie, it was still anti-black because you had the populist movement that was in the Midwest, but you also had a large populist presence in the South as well, right? Outside of the South, you didn't have the same kind of racial antagonism as you did in the South, right? But still, there were times, and Steve Aaron Wilbur discusses this in a piece on Tom Watson, who was this Georgia populist, right? You didn't think I forgot that, did you? Yeah. He talks about Tom Watson's evolution, right? So he starts out, as this really hardcore populist, and then when he sees the Democratic Party making inroads, he changes, right? He starts to change his tune a little bit, right? So I want to just point that out. It's not, and as far as the anti-Semitism is concerned, there's a book by Walter Nugent, who writes that yeah, there was some anti-Semitism, right? But it was a small segment of the populist movement, right? It was relegated to this fringe faction. Nativism, there was a bit more nativism, right? So what I'm trying to say is it's not this sort of blanket historically. If we're thinking about this historically, right? Populism is not inherently intolerant, is what I'm trying to say. But so if we think about the policy prescriptions associated with populism, right? Because they all say, it's about economic anxiety. And yeah, that's what we kind of saw, with the classic populist movement, or Popular for the People's Party, if you will. I just said, about class, it was about this idea that they were getting a raw deal from East Coast capital. And so we think about it like this, okay, this should be about economic anxiety. Okay, of course, you get Trump supporters are claiming that, okay, we lost these jobs and he's going to get these jobs back for us. Well, I got news for you. Those jobs have been gone for 25, 27 years now. They ain't coming back, right? They're just not. Beyond that, Trump supporters, 60% of them have 67%, 2/3 have an income in the upper half of the income distribution, right? So let's get that straight. These people are not hurting for jobs, right? That is not happening for them. So that policy prescription, this whole idea of economic fairness that we can attach to the classical populist movement is not there, right? It's just not there. Now, how did we get into this trick bag of sort of associating contemporary populism, with this intolerance, right? Well, you can mainly trace it back to Hofstadter's work once again in the Age of Reform and his work in the paranoid style, in which he lumped populism in with, believe it or not, progressives, right? Now, here's the thing with Hofstadter's analysis. I don't know if any of you guys have read it. I know Cornell, perhaps. I know he has. Richard probably has too. A few other people. Very elegant writer, right? Extremely elegant writer, right? Really smart guy, but he wasn't long on facts. He wasn't long on primary sources, right? And that's where he comes in, for a lot of heavy criticism, right? And I didn't really notice that until I read The Tolerant Populist by Walter Nugent, and he just really, in one page, he just rips his whole argument apart. So I went back and did some investigation of my own. He was right. If you look at a lot of the stuff that Hofstadter wrote, especially the later, more popular stuff, Paranoid Style, The Age of Reform, and The Political Tradition were published in the 1940s, I think, right? 1948, American Political Tradition, I know at least. Then The Age of Reform, I think, was after that. But the Paranoid Style in American Politics, published in the early 1960s, right? And there are a lot of, and Anti-Intellectualism in American Life, published in the late 1950s, right? Early 1960s. Big gaps when it comes to the sources, right? And I'm not even talking about primary sources now. I'm talking about any sources. I'm talking about even secondary sources, right? It's almost like he free-handed a whole bunch of that stuff, right? It is persuasive, right? But anyway, so that's my conceptual critique. My empirical critique is this. So if you look at a lot of the stuff, like the Europeans write a lot on populism, right? So if you look at their stuff, there's a lot of it that's really good around elite discourse, right? They have this Parties Manifestos data set that goes back to the Second World War, right after the Second World War. And you have a lot of these politicians, what they do is they code their discourse and their speeches and stuff, and they code them as populists that are consistent with the guidelines I laid out, anti-elite, they're corrupt and they're virtuous people, more or less, right? But the problem that I had with that is just because these leaders are quote-unquote populist, you can't necessarily, the people in the mass public who are voting for them are necessarily populist, right? That's a big assumption that they make, and I just don't think you can get there. Two, they can't even agree on the measures that are in the mass public, how to measure it at the mass public level, right? They can't even come to any real agreement on how to measure that. And even on a couple occasions on which they do, now this is a big sort of social science term, they don't look at it in terms of second order models, second order factor models. And what I'm trying to say is that, so what they do is they either have these 2 or 3 what are called factors, like let's just say anti-elitism and people-centeredness, right? And so you can't just get it either one of those with just like one survey question. You have to get at them through several questions to make sure you're capturing the concept, right? And so the problem that they make is that instead of saying that both of these concepts fit under a larger sort of superordinate concept, which is populism, they never do that. And I suspect it's because, to use another kind of technical term, just that the model just falls apart. The model doesn't fit the data, as it were. And then the last point is that it's not invariant. And that's another fancy social scientific term, but just to simplify it some, what that means is that if populism were really a thing, then in any, like, let's say in Europe, right? That means that in the places where we see these populist leaders, that all of the people across Europe, regardless of the country in which they reside, they would think it the same concept or something very similar. But they don't, right? But they do not. So how can we say what we're seeing is populism on this scale when populism, or the definition of it, varies from country to country, right? And I'm in the process of doing some of this stuff now with my own research, at least in the United States. So I'm sorry to say this is my last slide. My talks are rarely this short, but I wanted to leave. No, I'll sum it up. I'll sum it up here in a second, right now. Cornell and Richard barged into the office when I was trying to finish my concluding slides.
He was writing this right back there.
I'll just wing it for you guys, don't mind. So here's the bottom line, you guys. Okay, so this is just imagine that there's some text here. Okay, I'm just gonna fill it in verbally. So the bottom line is this, right? I do think populism is a valid term. But I do think it needs to be contextualized. I think that the way that it's currently used conceptually is an issue and empirically is an issue, and this is the big takeaway point. So I'm sure most of you guys are saying, okay, we heard this guy drop some F-bombs and all that other stuff, and we've been sitting here half an hour, so what is the takeaway point? And for you students, especially graduate students, you guys kind of want to get to this quick, like, you know, like what's the big deal? Like, why am I sitting here, right? Well, here's the big deal. The problem is that if this continues, what this right-wing reaction, which I call sort of reactionary political model, continues to be addressed as populism, the problem is it has two problems. One, it relies on economic anxiety, and this reliance on economic anxiety allows it to elide racism, right? It's not about race, or it's not about nativity. No. It's about economic anxiety. That's a bunch of bullshit, right? You guys can look on my website, and I have some other people that I can refer you to whom I can refer you, that this is not about economic anxiety. So that's one problem. Another problem is it leads to faulty policy prescriptions, right? Because if this is really populism, as people insist that it is, the issue is that this is the policy prescription for that is more economic fairness, right? If we rely on the classical populist literature, right? But as the numbers show, as the empirics show, that's not going to be the answer. Yeah, for some people, that might be the answer. But you still have a whole lot of people, right, who are on this reactionary right, who still have issues, right? And who still want to take the country backwards in time. And so to the extent that is the policy prescription, it's not going to work. Right, so for a couple very practical reasons, I think this research is important. And I have some other research right now in which we're cleaving away this reactionary right, if you will, from a more traditional conservative right. And there are real differences between the reactionary right, these people who actually want to go backwards in time, these people who think that social change is about subverting their social position and prestige, versus these more traditional people on the right who are like, look, we don't necessarily want change, but we'd rather have some sort of incremental change than this revolutionary change that can completely upend everything, right? So that's why you don't see people like, people like even Ronald Reagan couldn't make it in today's Republican Party. Bob Dole said this about 5 or 6 years ago. Neither he nor Ronald Reagan could make it in today's Republican Party, right? We see with Trump or number 45, because I refuse to call him my president. Ain't happening. I know where I am in Eastern Washington. I don't care, right? Not my president. And if you're a conservative, he shouldn't be your president, right? Because he is not conservative by any stretch of the imagination. Not. Zero. None. Right? He's not. You guys, who are conservative or traditional Republican, you guys should be pissed off too, right? I don't even really identify with the Democrats, to be honest with you, right? I'm in limbo someplace. I don't know what to do with those people. I really don't. I'm like a free agent right now. Because let me tell you, okay, you guys see me, okay, he's a sort of radical liberal college professor who's black, and that tells me that, no. I was in the military, right? And I used to be a probation officer. So I'm always in here someplace, right? So if I had more time, I would go on Democrats too. I would go hard depending on them, right? So this is not a left-right thing, right? This is not a left-right thing. I just don't have enough time to study them. I'll leave that up to other people, right? Because I'm already on this research program, so I'm kind of sticking with this. So anyway, so that's all I really have to say. I really appreciate you guys giving me an audience here, and I use the language. I want to make this perfectly clear. I use the language that I use mainly because I want to shock you guys. It's lunchtime. People get sleepy, right? So I want to shock you guys, but I also want you guys to really pay attention, right? And I hope I succeeded in doing so. So anyway, without any further ado, I eagerly await your questions and your comments. Thank you.
Okay, we have about 20 minutes for some Q&A. Maybe I'll start us off. I understand your critique about contemporary populism and conceptually how we apply it. And there's a large, undoubtedly a big racial component to what we call populism today, no question.
Yeah.
What I don't understand your critique of early 20th and late 19th century populism, because it was definitely racist, clear. I mean, you can't read Tom Watson, who was the People's Party candidate in 1904 and the vice presidential candidate throughout the 1890s.
Yeah.
You can't read his stuff and not realize he's racist. But you can't read the People's Party's platform and the large amount it devotes to the gold conspiracy, which is deeply anti-Semitic. Deeply anti-Semitic.
Okay.
You know, it's all about Jews taking over the international monetary system, right? So
wait, that was in the platform?
That's in the platform.
Which one? 1904?
In 1904 and 1908. And,
Okay.
and that's William Jennings Bryan's famous speech is the gold conspiracy.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So, I mean, it just seems to me, at least we don't know what the masses were thinking about populism back then. We don't have data on it. But what we do know is what the elites were saying and what they were writing.
Yeah.
And
No, I think those.
I don't understand that part of your critique.
Yeah, I think. Well, if I'm gonna keep it 100% here. That's like, that's based on my reading of Michael Rogan and Walter Nugent and C. Van Woodward. That they weren't as right, which is not to say that they were not at all racist or anti-Semitic at all. That's not what their claim is, and I would certainly never make that claim. So I think that is definitely a valid critique. But what I will say, well, and I guess that's where I'm trying to go with this, right? I'm like, there's this automatic sort of reaction, like they're automatically all racist or all anti-Semitic, and that's the way that it's played up right now. And what I'm saying is, by drawing on these scholars that I just mentioned, is that, okay, well, yeah, some of that's true, but it's not as bad. Now, imagine me as a black man saying this, right? That doesn't go down too easy for me, right? But I have to give these scholars some weight, right? Because Walter Nugent's book was on the Kansas populace, right? Now, realize, right, that there are going to be some interstate differences, right, in the populist parties, right? But, his was the most thoroughgoing work on this, right, when it comes to examining the content of, have you read Walter's book yet? Okay. So I'm just going to say that, you know what? I'm just going to do what Bob Mueller did. I'm going to punt on this. No, but
we'll argue about it later.
Okay, we can argue about it later. But I still have to kind of reconcile that, right? Yeah. And I'm still in the process of doing so. That's a really good question. Thank you. Oh, and by the way, if you have if you want to ask a question or you have any comments, and we don't have the time to get to it in Q&A, please feel free to shoot me an email. Okay? I mean, if you have a criticism, withering or not, or if you have any comments, please, or questions even, please don't hesitate to contact me. Okay? Thank you. Yes. So when I call on you, can you please tell me your name?
Mark Tronson.
Okay.
My critique is, so the whole idea is it's not entirely class-based and more on racial. But I would ask, the general election for like a Barack Obama and Trump, the two things that they have in common that kind of points that it is a class thing is that.
I agree with you, right, dude? So, please tell me.
Because, because both Donald Trump and Obama, one thing they had in common was that they were relatively new to their parties.
Yeah.
Whereas both Clinton and Bush, and the irony is we got a Clinton and a Bush in each of these elections. Yeah. And you get, basically, it almost seems like it is an elite. You can make that argument that it is an elite of elite, if you will, because it's not even a group of rich people that can become president. It's a group of rich people inside this party that seem to be able to roll it for a large number of time, like the Clintons for the Democrats and the Bushes for the Republicans. And I would argue that does kind of show a class pushback.
Okay. Yeah, no, look, I don't, you talking about, you think it's class right now, right? Okay. I mean, I guess you can make that, kind of make that argument.
In a very broad sense with racism thrown.
Yeah, I guess, but I've not seen it framed or heard it framed like that. That this could be just a class pushback. That they don't like these elite folks taking over. Like especially the Bush and the Clintons.
Well, yeah, especially for a long period. I mean, what has it been, like 20 years?
Yeah.
Roughly, it's 30 if you count the entirety of the 90s. So. Yeah,
no, that's true. But some of the stuff that I haven't shown here, that I haven't had time to show, but that. Matt and I show in the Tea Party book, and we also show in our new book, is that if you look at, sort of support for Trump, not only whether or not one is willing to vote for Trump, but also just support for him and approval on a more general level, right? And we're talking about, this data comes from 2016, that, when you put in, like if you look at education, income, whether or not one is a homeowner, And we even throw another one in there. Okay, so that's subjective. That's objective class. And then we even throw in there economic anxiety, right? And we throw in there whether or not you are concerned about, trade deficits with China, right? None of that works. None of it does, right? And so I mean, there's a whole lot I wasn't able to really unpack here, but that's another reason why we think that this is not really about class, right? Now, let me backtrack. Now, this is after we have what's called fully specified a model, right? That is to say, after we throw in authoritarianism, racism, xenophobia, right? So it could very well be the case that what you see as class is working its way through those variables, right? Yeah. Now, once we account for them, any sort of class-based effect disappears, right? And I'm like 99% sure that's the case, right? Because if you look at it at what's called the bivariate level, just looking at it between support for Trump and various educational or income levels, there are slight differences, right? But if we want to fully specify the model, in terms of that's consistent with the rigor of social science, then we have to put those other things in there, right? Any other?
Oh, no, that's
okay. Wow. Okay. So can we start at this end and then I'll work my way back this way? Yes, sir. What's your name?
Roger Whitson.
Okay, Roger. Thank you.
Yeah, and I don't know. It's not really a question, more of a comment, and I just wonder how you would respond.
Sure.
But it struck me your talk. There were interfaces. I'm not in poli-sci, so I'm not really sure about the research. But how a lot of your work interfaces with the work on reparations, for instance, the idea that so much of our country economically was built off the backs of slavery and slave labor. But then also a lot of the history of racism in America. So you're looking at the development of race-based laws in pre-American colonial governments and the way in which a lot of them were designed to sort of break the alliances between indentured servants, white indentured servants, and black slaves. And I'm wondering, going back to what he was talking about populism, if populism isn't kind of this result of this kind of white identity that's fashioned out of a kind of racist breaking of that class, in the sense of you have these race-based laws saying, you may be screwed because you're an indentured servant, you don't have any money, but at least you're black.
Right. Well, and that's essentially the case that I think Democrats made back in the 19th century, right? At least you're not black, right? You guys should come to join us, right? Instead of joining them, right? So I think that's where that came from, right? So they basically, the Democrats, for those of you who are really young, look, the Democrats weren't always the good guys, right? That didn't really happen, until the mid to late 1960s, right? Because I get people emailing me all the time, right? Oh, the Democrats were I'm like, don't you think I know that, fool? Of course I know that. So, anyway, but I think, that's a really good point. So what happened was basically the Democrat Party came in and played the race card. And that's one of the reasons why the Populist Party, if you will, dissolved or broke up, right? And I don't know really much about, I know William Jennings Bryan was part of the sculpture. I mean, I've not read any biographies on him at all. So maybe over supper. We'll argue later. We can talk about that. Are we still arguing at this point? Okay, all right. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Oh, Bill Kerr.
Bill, yes.
I'm still confused with the terms populist and populism.
Oh no, these are no. So those are. So what happened was, they're equivalent terms, right? So some people, I would imagine, would look to try to associate Trump with populism, right? And some people would look up Trump populist, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's all it is. That's all it is. Anyone else working? Yes, sir.
Hi, my name's Amir.
Yes.
So I just wanted to know how you would reconcile the image of a populist / nationalist Trump as we imagine in 2016 with the and kind of all that nationalism and the nativism that he was associated with entails. How do you reconcile that with the image of him in 2019 as the most avidly pro-Zionist president?
Oh, wow. So if you think about it, okay, so I don't want to get too far out here. I don't want to get too far over. What's the saying? Analog over my skis or something like that. Since snow outside, whatever. Too far ahead of my skis. I guess that's what it is. So if you think about, wow. So pro-Zionist and and sort of.
Yeah, because I guess it kind of flies against a lot of the stereotypes or tropes or rhetoric that you associate with a lot of nativist and nationalist rhetoric for like a right-wing reactionary candidate to be so openly pro-Zionist. Right? 'Cause those two clash.
Well, but I'm not sure about that. If you think about yeah, that's okay. So here's one way of thinking about this, right? One way of thinking about this: if one is pro-Zionist, then one is, if we think about the hardcore right, in Israel, right? They are, and again, I know I'm on thin ice here, so don't. If you think about them, right? They're like really. You think about the settlements. You think about everything that's associated with that, right? You think about this racial exclusivity and ethnic exclusivity. This goes hand in hand with the nativism, right, and racism, right? So just the way that, just think about what happened. Like, I'm no expert in Middle Eastern politics, right? So don't jump on me with both feet, because don't treat me like some people treated Mearsheimer and Walt when they wrote that book on. And I know both of those guys. I went to grad school in Chicago, and Mearsheimer was loving it. I talked to Walt. I was like, "Hey man, what do you think is happening with this book? And he looked like he was 10 years older than the last time I'd seen it, because he just couldn't take it, right? So anyway, don't treat me like that, okay? I'm just saying that, So if you think about what happened, so you just had, apparently Netanyahu, apparently the military had drawn up a relatively relatively small target package, and then he went back and revised it for a larger target package, right? And so it's this sort of, so I guess one of the ways to put these two together is this sort of really aggressive stance on, maintaining the cultural status quo. Go ahead.
I'm just mulling it over.
Like I said, I'm no expert on Middle Eastern politics. So anyway, okay, who's next? Next. Any more hands on this side? Oh, yes.
Hi. I was thinking about that question, and just because not that long ago we had one of my colleagues who works on evangelicalism, and Zionism is very much tied to modern evangelicalism in terms of fulfilling all these ideas that they have. I'm not going to say anything more about that.
Okay.
But they're ideas about the end
All
of
right.
days and things like that. So that's kind of a connection.
Okay.
The question I had is, where does this populism narrative come from? Because you showed your data and the big spike on the elections. So it wasn't like political scientists had really had time to do any research. So who started this rumor or myth or whatever?
I think it comes from. I'm just speculating here. This is ultimately an empirical question, but I think it comes from Europe, right? Because this stuff had been going on prior to that. If we can go back to, like the mid to late 1990s is where you start seeing a sort of reactionary phase in European politics, and I think that Americans, American political elites, they weren't really accustomed to this, right? And so they picked up on these trends that were happening in Europe, and they just adopted it, right? Without even really giving it a whole lot of critical thought. And then what you can do is, it's easy to go back, once again, to Hofstadter's work, especially in the Paranoid style, right? Where he's talking about populism, right? He's talking about these really, what's the word I'm looking for? In a very kind of partisan way, right? Just really the way he talks about populists. He really paints them in a real negative light, right? And then he associated with, Father Coughlin back in the 1930s with his radio ministry, Huey Kingfish Long, right? Louisiana politician, right? And so that gained some currency, among American intellectuals, right? I don't happen to think it's right, but I've been really loath to really wade into this too much because, I'm a political scientist, right? We're not supposed to know a lot about history, right? And when we start treading on, some of you guys know this, right? When you start treading in, in historians.
I'm a historian, and I'm really glad that you are interested.
You're an exception, right? So it's like when you start writing on this stuff, they're like, well, wait a minute, you can't boil this down to a bunch of hypotheses and theories, right? Because each event, each historical moment is its own, right? It stands alone, right? And so I get dragged through the mud all the time. Now I don't really care, right? But it's just like, but I am really careful when I'm just now rolling out stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Especially something like this, where I still only really have a fuzzy idea of what's going on relative to what's been written. a really fuzzy idea about this stuff. But I am good enough on this stuff, so I got an email from Thomas Frank last night asking me questions, right? And I'm like, I don't know, I'm not a historian. I'm a historian. But thank you for the question. I'm really glad you appreciate that. Some of us really care about history, that happened before 1990, because some of us actually do. Any other?
Can I just go back to this comment about
Sure.
Zionism and white Christian
Yeah,
nationalism? Because there's a lot of data that show Trump supporters. One of the biggest explanatory factors, especially those who supported in the primaries against other Republican candidates, was Christian nationalism, and so that evangelical support that cuts across class groups. So that's a lot of those wealthy
I
people
think that's
support
right.
Donald
No, I think that's
Trump
right. No,
are
I
doing it
think
for religious reasons.
No, I think that's. Oh no, I think that's right. But the issue is, I like to see how that's modeled though, because I suspect that if it's a fully specified model, then I don't think that that's going to have an effect. But I like to, because we have it in our models, right? And it doesn't do anything. We just measure it as evangelicalism, right? Nothing, right? But this is a fully specified model with racism, sexism, all that other stuff in, right? So it's likely it's working its way through that, and I'm pretty confident that's the case, right? So I like to see. Can you shoot me the link to the? I like to see that. Yes, sir. You had a question?
Yeah, my name's Russ.
Yes.
I appreciate the history lesson you gave us on
I'm not so sure how.
populism.
I appreciate it though. I'll take the compliment. Yeah.
But I think what you said was that when populism first came about, it was more economic
Yes.
related.
Yeah.
And now you don't see it as so much economic.
Well,
related.
no. It's that I still think populism. That's why I don't think what we're seeing now is populism, and it's closer to nationalism, right? I don't think this is populism what we're seeing right now, right? This is not populism.
Well, I don't know. I guess from the election, it seemed like we got the Midwest or the middle of the country
Mhm.
versus the coast,
Okay.
right? Where all the elites
Right.
are. And so we got the same situation here in Washington, where we've got all of Eastern Washington versus King County.
Yeah. I know that one really well. I used to run the Washington poll for several years, right? So I know what these breakdown. Oh, I got a whole bunch of data I can show you guys, right, on the Washington poll thing. No, you're definitely right. It's King County versus every place. Northern, southern, eastern, yeah.
Yeah, but I think that, even probably in Europe and maybe even in Canada, they have similar situations. I was talking to some folks from British Columbia,
Yeah.
and they have the same similar type of issues where they complain about Toronto and Quebec
Yeah,
and Montreal
yeah.
run the whole country and make laws like
Yeah.
your sign's got to be in French
Yeah.
in British Columbia where nobody speaks French.
Yeah. But I think what you're referring to is more of a sort of rural urban thing, and not necessarily, a populism versus nationalism kind of thing. And don't get me wrong. I mean, there's just really, if you're interested, there's one of our colleagues at the University of Wisconsin, Catherine Kramer, wrote a book called The Politics of Resentment, and what it does is it discusses this concept of rural consciousness, right? Which it sounds like is what you're saying this is.
Yeah, but because of demographics, couldn't that come across as racism also?
Yes, but and that's one of the things I critiqued her on. It's like, you're saying that these people are angry that these elites in these more urban areas are, they don't share your values, but also the people that are the majority of the population in these urban areas don't share your values either. And the values of these rural folk are hardworking, industriousness, and it's like, so then what are you like? What are you saying? It just so happens that people that live in these areas tend to be people of color, right? So in that sense, there is a kind of way of reading that as racism as well, right? But what I'm saying here is that this is more of an urban-rural thing, and not necessarily a populist thing, right? But what I will say is, like, what I'm saying, just to answer your question though, this is not my main critique is like, this is not what we're seeing right now that's driving the political climate on the far right, not not the conservatives and the Republicans that are in the middle or that are more moderate, if you will, but the ones on the far right, those guys are not populists, right? They're, I'll just say, neo-nationalists, right? And neo-nationalism is about this idea of wanting to go backwards in time to reclaim the socially dominant position of your group, right? A real, true, quote-unquote, rock-rib conservative, as long as change is productive and it's not destructive, right? They're okay with it. They just don't want change to happen like that. As long as it's controlled and it's incremental, they're okay with it as long as it's moving society forward. Here's another way to think about differences between reactionary conservatives and establishment conservatives. A reactionary conservative, once again, wants to go backwards in time, and they're not so hot on the rule of law and law and order, right? Whereas these establishment types, that's what they're all about, is law and order and the rule of law, right? And so, I mean, so there are other differences to which I could point, but the point I'm trying to make is, and even Hofstadter says this in a Paranoid Style, the people that I'm referring to as reactionary, he calls them pseudo-conservatives, right? I don't think you can put all conservatives in the same bucket. To put Sarah Palin and Edmund Burke in the same bucket, that shit is crazy, right? And then we have a colleague at CUNY, City University of New York, named Corey Robin, who tried to do that. And I'm like, dude, don't do this, man. Don't do this. And he did. And in the Tea Party book, you can see where Matt and I just completely go in. It's like, how can you do this, right? He's saying all conservatives are the same. And I'm like, no, that's bullshit, because they're not, right? So I would just say that what we're seeing right now is not populism, at least in the classical sense, it's not populism, right? But these people who use the term claim it that it's populism, right? But in order for them to make this work, they have to qualify it by calling it right-wing populism. And for me, it's like either it's populism or it's not, right? And I happen to not think it is, based on my reading of what historians have written about classic populism. Now, if they want to get away from that and say, well, this is not really populism, this is like neo-populism or something like that, okay. Okay, I might be able to get with that. Yes, sir.
Could this be just a problem of like branding?
It could. Well,
because I'm just thinking, the Nationalist Socialist Party, a Workers' Party of Germany, the Nazis. It sounds like it's socialism, but we all know that it was exactly the opposite.
That could very well be the case, right? That could very well be the case. Again, I'm still kind of new to this, and this is my test drive. I'm just taking the car out. I'm not even out of the garage yet, vis-a-vis what I'm trying to do, with you guys here. So, anyway, the time to wrap.
Time for one more. Bro.
Okay, one more question. Can we get one on this side of the room? Because we haven't had one on this side. Did you have your hand up?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, so first, okay. Look. So first of all, thank you for your service, man. I was in the military myself, so thank you for your service. Appreciate that. Now, ask your question.
Well, I was gonna say I have often heard populism lumped in a lot with both. Say, I'm watching the Sanders campaign pretty closely.
Don't get me started on this.
I have heard populism.
Oh my God.
Both Trump and Sanders.
But he's actually a real populist.
Pretty interchangeably, and
no, he is. We can talk. We're going to argue about this too. Okay, go ahead.
I kind of do see a relation between economic reasons for voting for both sides. Like that sounds like a big reason for both supporters of both sides.
Yeah.
And then how you said that in the way that all conservatives are the same, I would say that all people voting for Sanders are the same.
Agreed.
And I was wondering if populism is an accurate term, what would you describe their similarities as?
Anti-elite.
Okay.
I think that probably comes closest, right? But don't get me wrong, I got as many issues with Bernie as I do with Trump. So again, maybe I can get invited out. Maybe we can resolve our argument in an amicable way. I can come out and go in on Democrats.
That'll be the next time. So before I ask you in joining me and thanking our guest, let me just remind you we have another event on Thursday. We have Andrew Zimbalist, who's a renowned sports economist in the country. At noon, he'll be having a discussion with Pat Chun, our athletics director, and Nancy Swanger, who is the head of our athletics council, about athletics budgets at WSU, which are in the red. And then at 4:30, he'll be giving a talk on whether the NCAA funding model is sustainable in the future or not. So I encourage you to come to both those. That later discussion is in the Cub Auditorium. The noontime event is here in the Cove. Now, Join me in thanking Chris Parker for a really fascinating.
And thank you all for your patience. I really appreciated that. Thank you.